Just a quick one on the update of the ASUU strike. We're all aware that ASUU has been on strike for some months now. And the issues broadly can be divided into two broad categories. Their incomes, wages, and salaries on the one hand. And on the other hand, there's the system of payment by which they should be paid their salaries and their allowances. As for the first part of it, people should realize that we in the Ministry of Labour, we are not the employers of members of ASUU. The employer of members of ASUU is the Ministry of Education. And so the Ministry of Education at some point took over the negotiation. We were just conciliators at the level of the Ministry of Labour. I hear a lot of people say that, oh, well, what are we doing? What are we not doing? We are not the employers. We are just conciliators. We intervene to try and settle both sides of the dispute. However, the Ministry of Education at a point set up a small committee within the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education set up what they call the Nimi Briggs Committee, Professor Nimi Briggs Committee, to receive the complaints of ASUU and then look into those complaints and see how those complaints could be accommodated within the framework of the finances of government. Now, when this committee began to sit with ASUU, there were other critical institutions of government that should have been at that meeting. National Income and Wages Salaries Commission, National Salaries and Income and Wages Commission, Budget Office of the Federation, Head of Service of the Federation, Ministry of Finance. ASUU at some point objected to these critical stakeholders sitting down with them. They said they were not cooperating with them. Well, how can you sit down with the Ministry of Education without those holding the pulse of government, without those who know the rules as to how public officers should be paid? How can you sit down with them and fix your own salaries? But that was what ASUU did originally with the Nimi Briggs Committee. They sat down, fixed their own salaries, and allowances with the Ministry of Education, without these other critical stakeholders. And guess what happened? At the end of the exercise, what did we come to? ASUU now put their percentage of their salary, some increase as to more than 100% to 100 and something percent. It now came up to an additional 560 billion naira on top of the normal 412 billion that the federal government was already paying for using to pay their salaries and their emoluments. They added another 560 billion to that bill. And then that does not even include things like their hazard allowance and all those other little allowances. All those allowances also came to another additional 170 billion. And so the entire bill came up to 1.2 trillion or thereabouts. Meanwhile, you had before, even before this situation, a situation where the federal government was already spending 50% of its overheads on salaries to pay them. That was the previous bill, 50% of its overheads regarding salaries and emoluments to pay university teachers their wages and allowances. So what the federal government did when they brought this proposal from the Nimi Briggs Committee, they said, well, this is unrealistic. You know what? You need to bring in other... They still went back to the same position where they had to bring in other critical stakeholders. National Income and Wages and Salaries Commission, Ministry of Finance, Budget Office of the Federation, Head of Service. They sat down again to look at all of this. And that was, led by the Office of the Chief of Staff. So all of them, they have looked at this again. They have looked at all of this and said, look, it's unrealistic. Because you now have the non-academic staff. They are also warming up to say, if you answer them, if you answer ASUU, we will also go on strike. You also have the polytechnic teachers, polytechnic lecturers and college of education say that if you answer ASUU, we are also going to join. So it's going to set off a chain of reaction that we cannot stop. And as let me just give you the grim picture of what we face. In 2023, the projection for 2023 is that the total income of government will be about 6.1 trillion. Subsidy alone will go up 6.3. In other words, subsidy will be more than even the total income of the federal government in 2023. So where do we go from here? And we have only one component. It's a critical component, I do accept, education. But one component placing this kind of burden on the federal purse. It's not just possible. So when they are looking at it again, and they are going to submit their, this other expanded committee will submit their, report to the federal government. But on the other issue of the system of payment, we all know that they came up with their own system, that the old system, the GPME system, was fraught with fraud. And we know that with this kind of critical financial situation we are facing, we need to make sure we clean up our system of payment. ASUU said no, that they are above the law. They will not join other people, other public servants in going through that system, that they want to develop their own system. Federal government said, okay, develop your own system. They developed what they call the UTA system. Federal government took it to NITDA, which is the agency, that ensures the sanctity of some of these things. They took it to NITDA. They, subjected it to test, and it failed the test. The stress test and all of that, it failed it. Meanwhile, the non-academic staff are saying, no, we will not even go with the UTAS that ASUU is developing. We are going to develop our own UPPPS system. How can you have a government with all parts, all different type of their employees developing their own system by which they will pay themselves? Which government will accept that? But despite all of that, the government was still patient enough to say, okay, you know what? Despite the fact that I failed this, stress system, go back again to NITDA. Go back. Subject all of this to test again. The UPPS, the UTAS, the IPPS, subject all to test. The federal government is still very patient with ASUU. And then when you go through all of this, come back again with a report to see whether we can give them another chance for this thing to pass through a stress test. But for the federal government to go ahead and start paying salaries and incomes and all that with a system that is not reliable, that is public money paid like that without a system that can be relied upon. It will be an irresponsible government that will do that. That is where we are, in brief, Seun.